Power 98.7 Podcasts. Refreshing and stimulating talk. Power 98.7. Now we're talking.
You tuned into PowerZONE. This is Nomfundo, Sheza standing in. Thank you for being with us. We are now going to be speaking to Leyla Hydrarian. Did I say it correctly?
You did. Well done.
I did try. We're going to be speaking about Donald Trump and bringing it home to an African perspective, an Ubuntu perspective. Donald Trump, Leyla, he's quite a divisive figure.
Yes, that's right.
and there's a lot more that is negative about him that is said than that is positive. But you bring a completely different spin or twist to it, and you are talking about it around the parameters of Ubuntu.
That's right. Correct. Yes.
So take us through that. Take us through your philosophy, and as you combine it with Donald Trump.
Okay, well, I think Donald Trump really exemplifies for many people what democracy has really been for a long time. But what he does is he's making it so extreme that we ask ourselves, is this really the type of communication that we want to be cultivating? He is extremely divisive in his rhetoric. He's insulting very often. And this is actually not something new. What we've been cultivating in the West is a culture of communication that is based in argument, that is based in conflict, that is based in focusing on what we don't have in common, what divides us. I often say it's really based on I am because you're not. I see it this way, you see it that way. Yeah. And so, in my humble opinion, the only antidote to this kind of thinking and this perpetuating of a very divisive, culture is to bring in what we know best here in South Africa, which is I am because we are. So I think that a lot of people are tempted, perhaps, to vilify him and criticize him and insult him. But I don't think that helps us. I don't think it helps us.
Is it undue though, the criticism? Because when you listen to him, there's a lot of bigotry that comes across. I mean, and not just comes across, but I would even go so far as to say that he is a bigot. Would you agree?
I think that he makes very many bad choices. I think that nobody is anything essentially. I think through our actions, we define ourselves. But I don't think that in essence anybody is anything. If he grew up in a loving home where unity was essential, he might have turned out differently.
So you think he is for lack of a better term, he is misnurtured?
Absolutely. And you can call him a bigot, and that's fine. That's not my problem. I think the problem I'm speaking about is that our rhetoric devolves and sort of goes down a few levels. And we go from stating what is factual to really a mudslinging contest where all we're doing is just throwing things at him for no reason, things like the size of his hands or the color of his hair, and things that are actually irrelevant to what the issues are at hand. And it sort of devolves communication. We see it in Parliament. I mean, the way parliamentary debates are devolving is, I think my 8-year-old and his friends have a more, I would say, civilized way of speaking about their differences than a lot of adults that are in politics at the moment.
So you would say it's an undue distraction and keeps us away from the real issues that we should focus on, where he is concerned and where his presidency is concerned. What are some of the issues that you think we should be focusing more on than his hands? I mean, yes, his hands are interesting, but where do you think our focus should rather be placed?
Well, just speaking very frankly about his policies, and I think it's what I'm criticizing or what I'm suggesting that we re-look at is also the intention behind what we're doing. You know, Ahmed Kasrada passed away, and he was really a champion of cultivating a style of communication that was very much in line with Ubuntu. And he would, you know, question the intentions behind communicative acts. He would say, you know, anger, revenge, these are negative emotions. And he would say, if you harbor those emotions, you suffer more and you cause more suffering. And, you know, creating a space where we can transform requires us not to be motivated by those lower intentions, things like hatred and revenge. Whereas if we're just motivated by trying to solve a problem or bring people together, we can focus on the issues, on the policies that Donald Trump is suggesting, and saying, okay, for this and that reason, I don't agree with him. For this and that reason, you know, we need to relook at these suggestions. We need to work towards social transformation so that these kinds of ideas don't take root in society, so that they can't grow. Let us figure out how in our communities we can create more understanding so that these kinds of hateful, you know, approaches don't take root and don't develop. But if we focus on our feeling of anger and revenge, then we're just adding to what's already there and what's already very divisive and counterproductive.
You are listening. If you're at home and you've just joined us, you're listening to the Power Zone. I am Nomfundo Sheza, and we are talking to Leyla Tavanado Haidarian, who is talking about embracing, I think I'm going to call it that, embracing Donald Trump from an Ubuntu perspective. And you can call us on 0861 987 000, or you can tweet us at PowerFM987. PowerZone is the hashtag. And if you have any questions and you want to join the discussions, do call us. Leyla, you speak a lot around community and a sense of togetherness and community and building. And I think maybe, you know, one may say that these are concepts that are very remote from just Donald Trump as a person. I mean, you also speak about embracing him and trying to bring him into a more progressive discourse. But Donald Trump, just by his very nature, is divisive. Donald Trump seems to have no real sense of community. And two, Donald Trump is very provocative. So when you hear him speak, it's almost as though he goes out of his way to rub certain groups the wrong way. And this is why I opened with bigot, because he seems to quite go out of his way to alienate certain groups and to rub them off the wrong way. How do you bring a person like that into progressive discourse?
I don't know. I think I'm perhaps being a little bit misunderstood. I'm not suggesting that we embrace him in his entirety and all the things that he has to say that are divisive. What I'm saying is in the way that we respond to him, in the way that we respond to his very divisive and provocative suggestions and policies, we maintain dignity. We maintain. We don't lower ourselves to the very level that we are criticizing him for, or anyone for. We're like, you know, we're highlighting him now, and I'm sure that we could highlight any politician or any public figure who is divisive. But I mean, you know, we just need to look at our own history to see that while Nelson Mandela was very critical and very outspoken about the evils of the apartheid government, he did not, you know, attack individual politicians or public figures in a way that was undignified, in a way that had nothing to do with the discussion at hand. You know, he didn't become personal. He didn't
Can it be helped though, Leyla, considering that he himself is, and I do understand where you're coming from, where you're saying don't come down, don't lower yourself to this particular sort of discussion or discourse. But again, considering the sort of personal and group attacks that he really disseminates, is it really always possible to be the bigger person where he's concerned? I
mean, that's a very good question. I mean, I think it goes back to us, human nature fundamentally. What is human nature? And I think we're constantly struggling between finding, turning towards our higher nature or succumbing to our lower nature. And of course, as individuals in our lives, we're constantly going through this, But I think it's a little bit lazy to say, okay, this is just human nature. When we're provoked, we provoke back. When somebody strikes us, we strike back. I think it takes a lot more effort and energy to provide something that is much more virtuous in the face of vice, to provide the antidote to that which we don't want to see in the world. I think it takes more courage. And when we look at the moral figures that we appreciate who have really turned history around for us, people like Nelson Mandela, people like Martin Luther King Jr., these people are embodiments of striving to embrace their higher nature. And I think ultimately that's what we can strive towards, even if we don't achieve it all the time.
No, I absolutely hear you, and to some degree I agree with you. Of course, some may say that we ultimately take our lessons from the top, and I mean it doesn't get us as top as the leader of the free world, and that is the position that he occupies. So some may say that we do take our lessons from the top, and that the tone is set from the top. What would you say to that?
I would say the tone is set from the grassroots. I think that democracy ultimately, by the people, for the people, should be something that we really set the tone for. And we've become very complacent, where we criticize our leaders and we look towards them to fix our problems. But democracy has also something to do with the general population. We as individuals have a lot of power. We as individuals have a lot of responsibility to live out our democratic, rights and beliefs. And so from the grassroots, we can cultivate something and create change that is much more powerful. I don't actually have much faith in the powers that be, quite honestly.
But you have more faith in the people.
Yes, absolutely. And there's so much innovation. And I think because what we see is people in the grassroots very often have characteristics that we don't find at the top anymore. Things like humility, things like the ability to cooperate or sacrifice. These are values that our top leaders are not really employing anymore. And in the grassroots, we see those values. So we need to sort of take back our power and decide that we're going to cultivate something very different, that we're going to cultivate a system of governance and communication that is driven by our desire to cooperate and collaborate and reach out to one another.
We're still talking to Leyla Tavernado Haidarian on the Power Zone. This is Nomfundo Sheza standing in. And if you want to join the conversation, do call us on 0861 987 000 or tweet us at PowerFM 987. Power Zone is the tag. So if you, I think maybe, I mean, obviously I'm not American, so I'm sort of somewhat removed. But just looking at it from an outsider's perspective, it almost seems like a setback, to move from a leader such as Obama, who was more charismatic, who was a lot easier to embrace, if I can go back to that term, who had a more visible and stronger sense of community, to now have Donald Trump. It almost seems like a cold, rude reawakening.
Absolutely, and I think that's very fair. And I think very often in human history we take one step forward and a few steps back,
and 1,000 backwards.
Yeah. It's true. I agree with you, and I think that as individuals we can make those distinctions. We see certain characteristics in the Obamas and the whole family that are really amazing, and it was such a huge stride for America. But I think what the situation with Donald Trump is showing us as well is that the problem is systemic. It's in it's in the system of Western liberal democracy. The fact that leaders like Donald Trump can, gain ascendancy has something to do with the way that we've been creating democracy and the assumptions that we've been basing our democratic structures and systems on. So I think that it's just a bit of a wake-up call for us to get busy as citizens, as people in the grassroots, and to take charge again and not to sort of become complacent
or be bystanders in our own democracy.
Absolutely, exactly.
Did you expect him to win, Leyla?
No, I did not. I think alongside millions of people around the world, I was truly, truly flabbergasted. Although perhaps there was a part of me that sort of thought, maybe this is what people need. People need this to sort of wake up and say, okay, today in my neighborhood, what can I do? How can I reach out to people and create a world in my sphere of influence that won't allow the kinds of ideas that Donald Trump represents, and that sort of have been reaping havoc in our democracy, not to thrive. How can we create the conditions to reach out to people? And what is my role in this? Because at the end of the day, a lot of people did vote for him. And those people must have also felt something. They must have felt left out. They must have felt alienated. And so we as individuals have a job to do. And we need to get it done.
So, and it's interesting that you bring up the point of some people, having bought into him because they felt a lot of the things that he highlighted, and I mean from a South African perspective, again looking from the outside in, is that would that be Americans generally, or a certain group of Americans, and which group of Americans would you say that bought into his ideas more and felt more included by his exclusion, if you can call it that?
I think we see it everywhere in the world. I mean, I was born and raised in Europe, and my own country, Austria, underwent a very similar sort of division where we had two presidential candidates, one of which was a lot more divisive and populist, and the other one was a lot more embracing, perhaps. And he got voted in the end. But I think what happens everywhere in the world where you find this trend, you're finding people who are a little bit sidelined by this global movement towards unity and exposure, people who are not exposed to diversity, people who haven't had the chance to mingle and mix with people from different religious and racial backgrounds, and people perhaps who are not doing well economically, and sort of feel like the train has left and they've been left behind and they're not on the bandwagon. And so it's really a state of ignorance. And as horrible as it may seem, and I know that we've seen so many video clips of people being very ignorant and racist and horrible, yes, but what they need is not more hate and more, more ridicule. They probably need to be reached out to.
What are some of the ways that
included?
What are some of the ways that you think they could be reached out to?
Look, I mean, I can only speak from my own experience, and in my own sphere of influence, I reach out to my immediate community. I try and engage in activities that bring my neighborhood together. I'm involved in children's classes for kids of all religious backgrounds, where we get together and we talk about virtues and we talk about moral education. I'm involved in junior youth group classes where young community leaders get together and talk about issues like this and are given the chance to develop the tools to speak about issues like this. So I think we need to be involved in our communities, get to know our neighbors. It's that simple, get to know the person who's a little bit different than us. Invite them over for dinner, for tea, have conversations, start activities, especially for children and youth, because They are, I think, our saviors. They really are so pure, and they still have a sense of idealism, and they still have a sense that they can bring people together, whereas I think the older generation is very often a lost cause. I'm glad.
I don't agree or disagree, but I find that intriguing. I hear you, and I think in what you're saying, I hear and I agree with a lot of it. But some may say that some of it sounds like overburdening the already burdened. I mean, here you are already in a society where you are feeling excluded, because I would imagine that there are a lot of groups that are feeling particularly more excluded now with Trump as the current leader. So here you are already existing in this community where you are being excluded, where things, most of them untrue, most of them unfair, are said about you on a daily basis, and yet you are still expected to reach out and form a sense of community and form communities with these people who are excluding you. What would you say about that?
Well, unfortunately, that just seems to be the way it works. I mean, it's the same with Nelson Mandela. He could have felt sorry for himself, 30 years in prison, and say, why am I expected to become this moral authority and forgive and forget and rise?
Is that what the excluded should be, the moral authority?
Well, I don't know if they should be. I think it's an opportunity. I think people who have suffered are usually the people who have they've mined their gems. Like we all have gems inside us, and suffering causes those gems to shine and come out. It's very much like the process in a mine. Like you mine those diamonds. It's difficult work. You have to go down into that darkness, grab those gems, bring them out into the light. It's painful, but it's there. And I think people who have suffered and have been oppressed are usually the ones who have, are in a situation where they can reach out. And it's also a matter of how you look at things. I often look at people who are, very small-minded or racist or closed-minded. I look at them as being a little bit handicapped in a spiritual way. And I think we need to be compassionate towards those people and reach out to them and help them in some ways. I think it's just a matter of how you look at it. If you look at it through the lens of, this is completely unjust, and we need to let go of our anger. I mean, let it loose and create revenge, or we say, no, we need to reach out. We need to take the higher road and create difference and make a difference. I think history shows us that it's possible, and that unfortunately those who have been oppressed are the ones who are in that position to be able to make that change.
So we are made stronger in our suffering.
Yeah. We're made stronger, shinier, brighter, more purified, in essence. Really, I mean, you put gold in fire and it starts to glow. It's being put through the fire, but then it glows, and all the alloys come out, and all the impurities come out, and it just shines, and it becomes so powerful. And that's really what it is with human nature as well.
I'm going to try and bring it, more into the South African discourse, where we have, we especially, Black people hear similar things about being made stronger through suffering, about having to forgive, about having to reach out to, the more closed-minded people, more racist people, as you said earlier. And it almost seems like a further form of oppression. It's like moving from one version of oppression to another version of oppression. And yes, I hear you in saying we are made stronger through our suffering, and those who suffer are usually the ones who become more empowered, in a sense, to be better people and to build stronger communities. But there's also and an element of further burdening and also like a different version of oppression. And a lot in South Africa would say that, particularly with the with the current climate, that Black people have moved from one version of oppression, simply moved from one version of oppression to another, and through all of that, Black people are expected to forgive and overcome. The constant overcoming, the constant expectation to overcome, for Black people to overcome. What would you say there?
Yeah. Look, it's completely understandable not to want to do that, and I have complete sympathy for it, and I have no judgment. I completely understand. That's why, I get very upset when people get upset about the crime levels in South Africa and say, it's like this and like that, and I'm leaving, and I say, well, you have to kind of look at the consequences of what apartheid created. It's sort of, we're paying the price for it now, and instead of running away from it, we need to be there and rebuild together. But on the other hand, the question is, what's the alternative? When you think about the alternative, is more hate, more anger, more resentment. I don't know. Where does that get us? I don't know. Where does that get us? I mean, it might give us a short-lived sense of gratification, but I don't see much happening after that. I don't think it's sort of like fighting fire with fire. You probably want to fight it with water. Unfortunately, that's how it works. That's sort of like the law of nature. And I mean, we can bring out the fire again and just, but it just takes longer. I just think it sort of prolongs the processes.
And delays the healing.
Probably. But it's understandable. So I think it'll just take as long as it takes. And that's it. We just go through it. It's completely natural and understandable.
But going back to Donald Trump and the mud slinging and particularly how his whole family is brought into it. Not only are negative things said just about him, but negative things are said. There's a lot of negativity in what is said about his wife. There's a lot of negativity in what is said about his children. Surely that's unfair.
Yes, I mean, especially when it comes to children. I mean, we've seen Hillary Clinton's daughter Chelsea come out and sort of say, "Come on, let this poor kid be. He really didn't choose the spotlight." So there's that sense of people being pulled into the spotlight. I think his wife probably chose to be in the spotlight as well. I'm assuming.
Did she?
She does strike me as someone who doesn't mind the spotlight.
Yeah.
But I think, again, there's a lot of focus on things that are a little bit irrelevant. And if we were focusing on those things in any other person, it would be wrong. So
it's almost excusable because it happens to be Donald Trump.
Yeah. I mean, look, people do it, but I just don't see how it helps us move forward or helps us focus on what is really. It's more like a distraction. It makes us feel like we're doing something, but we're not really. We just get a sense of satisfaction out of being insulting and horrible and because it just feels right and it feels like he deserves it or they deserve it.
It's almost soothing.
Sure, but it doesn't really do much in order to change, to really, really create lasting change.
But again, this for me has been a very eye-opening conversation, and from a perspective, because I mean I think my perspective is to either ignore him or ridicule him.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's been very interesting to hear from you and your perspective. And in wrapping up, what do you think Donald Trump teaches us about Ubuntu? What do you think it teaches us about going back to the basics of Ubuntu? And what more can we do to sort of learn from this experience and take it as an opportunity to revisit some of the Ubuntu elements?
I think Donald Trump really is just a wake-up call for us. I think we were in slumber, and we have all this faith in the system taking care of itself. But I think Donald Trump reminds us that we as individuals, as participants in the democratic process, each and every one of us is so important, not only in the way in which we vote, but also in the way in which we live our day-to-day lives, in the way that we are citizens, in the way that, yes, we demand our rights, but also in the way that we carry out our responsibilities. And there's not enough attention on that. You know, we talk very much about our rights, but we don't talk about our responsibilities of creating democracy in our lives, in our communities, in our own sphere of influence. And so if there's anything, then we can say thank you for reminding us.
To be the change that we want to see in the world.
World.
Thank you so much, Leyla. Thank you for that perspective, and thank you for speaking to us.
Thank you, Nomfundo.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you to you, the listener, for staying with us and for tuning in. Thank you for your calls. Thank you for participating. Until we see you again, thank you and have a good day further.
Power 98.7 Podcast.